Have you ever wondered what happens when a creature seemingly clinging to life becomes the thread pulling a mother back from the depths of despair? In the midst of a snowstorm, the cabin door opens, and that very moment awakens the heart of a mother frozen through 4 winters. No one could have guessed that the exhausted dog lying on the snow would bring with it the soul of the past and a secret long buried. What makes a mother willing to risk safety just for a glance in the darkness? Where are you watching this video? Please share and follow the story below so we can spread this warmth to every corner. Montana entered its coldest month of the year with winds howling through the forests and a gray sky that seemed covered in a layer of silent ash. Snow fell heavily, piling into knee-deep layers outside windows that had been sealed shut for weeks. In the wooden cabin, isolated on a pine-covered mountainside, Mrs. Evelyn Harper sat motionless before a small fire flickering in the old stone fireplace. In her hands was a half-knitted wool scarf, military green. The knitting needles were loose, trembling like the hands that held them. Evelyn had once knitted an identical scarf for Luke during the first winter he enlisted. Now she didn't know why she was knitting another one, perhaps out of habit, or perhaps because the longing had become part of her flesh. Evelyn Harper, 62 years old, retired military nurse, was a woman of prolonged silences. The entire wooden house was home to sighs, heartbreaks, and occasionally the echoing laughter of a child that once rang out on the doorstep. Luke Harper, her only son, had died in action in Kunduz, Afghanistan, 4 years ago. The day his military vehicle hit a mine, the entire team consumed in a sea of flames, was the day Evelyn froze, without a cry, without a tear. She simply folded her son's blanket, put away his uniform in the drawer, and since then rarely ventured into town unless absolutely necessary. In the small town below the mountain, people still referred to Evelyn with a compassionate nickname, the Winter Mother. Everyone understood that for Evelyn, winter wasn't just weather. It was an endless sorrow blanketing her soul. Each year when snow began to fall, she would close the cabin door, stockpile food, and cut off all contact with the outside world, as if allowing her pain to quietly live alongside the cold wind and darkness. The cabin wasn't large, but it was cozy. Wooden furnishings, old wicker chairs, the small kitchen table where Evelyn still brewed tea each morning. In the corner stood a bookshelf where she kept medical records, letters, and a journal never written in since the day Luke's name was sealed away. Once her only neighbor, Charles, a veteran, asked, "Evelyn, why don't you move down closer to us? Winter's coming. It's dangerous up on the mountain." She only smiled faintly. "Up there, Luke still remains." Wind whistled through the door cracks like distant whispers. The pine branches in front of the porch broke under the weight, leaving dry, brittle sounds like bones colliding in the cold night. Evelyn wasn't afraid of these sounds. She had lived through war, where bombs, gunfire, and screams were everyday occurrences. The silence now was what confused her. That night, snow began to fall more heavily. Under the small oil lamp, Evelyn sat alone by the fireplace. Her shadow stretched long on the wooden wall, swaying with the flames. A faded silver picture frame sat beside the fireplace. In it was Luke, in uniform, smiling radiantly, arms wrapped around a white husky. "Sky," Evelyn whispered, gently stroking the dusty glass. "She was always by your side." Sky, the dog Luke had trained, had also disappeared after that ambush. No one found her body. No one mentioned her anymore. Evelyn thought sometimes things don't disappear because they die, but because people dare not remember. The fire dimmed. She added wood. The red flames flared up, chasing away shadows from one corner of the room. Outside, snow swept furiously like thousands of whispering souls. Evelyn silently stood up, walked to the door, lifted her face to the white curtain swallowing the world. She took a deep breath. The cold air cut into her lungs. "You still haven't come home," she said softly, as if speaking to the wind or to someone she had never stopped waiting for. During her years as a frontline nurse, Evelyn had witnessed too much loss, but losing her son was a wound that would never heal. She had saved hundreds of soldiers, delivered babies in bunkers, stitched wounds under gunfire, but now she couldn't save herself. Each morning she brewed tea, placed a small cup on the table opposite her, as if Luke would walk in at any moment. Each night she lit a candle in the north window, where light could guide lost souls home. And every winter she knitted a scarf, not for warmth but to fill the void. She once believed that time could ease pain, but now Evelyn understood. Time doesn't erase, it only teaches us to live with the emptiness. On the porch, the snowstorm howled, as if dragging all the ghosts from the past. Evelyn closed the door, locked it tight, then returned to the armchair in front of the fireplace. Her hands found the ball of yarn again, continuing to knit tight stitches. Each stitch a heartbeat, a memory, an unspoken wish. In the corner of the cabin, the small radio suddenly played an old tune. "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," that Luke used to sing as a child. The husky voice rang out amid the snowstorm, amid the thick silence. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Evelyn didn't cry. She only clutched the scarf she was knitting. The firelight reflected in her eyes. Not brilliant, but enough to keep her heart beating through this final winter. The Montana sky that night seemed frozen by the very sorrow rising from the Earth's core. Wind screamed through mountain gaps, whipping snow against the cabin windows, as if trying to collapse the entire world. In the small wooden house isolated amidst the pine forest, Evelyn Harper still sat by the fireplace, the only flame keeping warmth in her heart, and perhaps in her soul as well. Her silver hair was tied neatly behind her neck, her wrinkled skin bearing the marks of time and war. Evelyn, 62, was no longer a nurse ready to rush to the front lines to snatch life from death's hands, but merely a lonely mother living each day in a longing that stretched through 4 winters. The military green scarf she was knitting had fallen into her lap. Her hands had stopped moving long ago. Her eyes stared fixedly into the flames, where the bright red glow reflected the image of Luke, her only son who forever remained on the battlefields of Afghanistan. "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm always fine," she whispered, as if talking to herself or to someone sitting beside her in another space, the space of those who had passed. Then, amid the freezing stillness of the snowy night, a soft scratching sound. At first, Evelyn thought it was the wind, but then another sound, short, urgent, feeble, like claws scraping in desperation. She sat up straight. In her many years as a nurse, she had become too familiar with the call of life when it was about to fade. Those sounds like final pleas from bodies lying on stretchers, waiting for a miracle. She walked to the front door. No lights on. Her eyes were old but had never dimmed in the face of adversity. Her trembling hand rested on the door latch. Wind hissed through the cracks like a warning. "Don't!" But Evelyn, like many other times in her life, chose to open the door rather than turn away. And then she saw a white figure curled up, collapsed on the thick snow, almost half buried in the freezing whiteness. It was a female husky, her entire body covered in frost. Patches of gray-white fur, matted and blood-stained. Her body was skeletal, eye sockets deeply sunken, hind legs trembling. But what made Evelyn's breath catch wasn't the wounds, but the way the dog curled her body to completely embrace 2 tiny lives nestled beneath her belly. 2 puppies, still reddish with sparse fur, eyes not yet open, shivering in the cold, pressed tightly against their mother's chest, where no milk remained. The mother dog raised her head when she saw Evelyn. Her eyes were amber, cloudy, exhausted and resigned, but still glimmering with fragile determination. No barking, no growling, just a look, as if saying, "I'm not asking for anything. I just want my children to live." Evelyn froze, and an old memory flooded back. That year, also winter, Luke wrapped himself in a loose sweater, lying on the cabin floor beside the first husky that she had adopted for him, named Sky. Both slept by the fireplace, warm and peaceful. Evelyn sat in the armchair, knitting the first scarf for her son. She clearly remembered Luke's voice when he turned, yawned, and whispered, "You know what, Mom? I wish Sky had puppies. Then our whole family could raise them. You're a good nurse. Surely you could be a vet too, right?" Evelyn had laughed, pulling the blanket over him, saying, "If they're puppies, I can heal them. But if it's you, I just want to keep you here forever." Now before her, like an old film coming to life, a mother, a child, and a fragile creature fighting for each moment of life amid the storm. The mother dog raised her head when she saw Evelyn. Her eyes, cloudy from cold and exhaustion, still shone with a direct gaze, almost like an unspoken plea. Evelyn stood motionless in the doorway, her feet stuck to the wooden floor as if held by some invisible force. Snow still fell heavily, covering the porch steps in white, but she couldn't feel the cold, because right now inside her was something colder than the blizzard outside: fear, hesitation, and doubt. She had witnessed so many lives slip away under her hands. Every pleading gaze, every final moan. She had reached out and failed, and now this scene was painfully familiar. "I'll save it. And then what? What if it dies in my arms?" Evelyn bit her lip. An old fear surged like a wave. She remembered the last time on the front line, trying to keep a young private, only 19 years old, alive after a mine explosion. She had done everything: chest compressions, blood transfusions, even used her own rations to keep him warm. But by morning he had died, cold in her arms. Since then, Evelyn had saved no one. "I don't have the strength. I'm not resilient enough anymore." Moreover, she feared heartbreak. She had once raised Sky, Luke's first husky, as part of the family. When it died of old age just 6 months after Luke was killed in action, she vowed never to care for another animal again, because love was too heavy a gift, and loss, a price no one could prepare for. Now before her eyes was once again a heart being tested. "I can't save anyone else. I can't bear the price of loving anymore." Evelyn turned, for a moment. Her hand had touched the door, about to pull it closed. The wind howled louder, as if wanting to sweep away the frail figure outside. One of the puppies whimpered faintly, its cry as thin as a fragile thread. And at that very moment, Luke appeared in her mind. When he was small, Luke once found a kitten with paralyzed hind legs behind some bushes. Evelyn had said they shouldn't keep it, because the animal was weak, could die at any moment. But Luke looked at her, eyes reddened. "Mom, if I were dying somewhere, wouldn't you want someone to save me?" Those words were like a knife slowly cutting through Evelyn's heart right now. She turned back, looking at the mother and puppies still curled up, snow beginning to stick in layers on the dog's fur. The mother's eyes still watching, not reproachful, not urgent, just silent faith. She knelt down. Her hands touched that ice-cold body, and for the first time in many years, Evelyn spoke through tears. "I was wrong, Luke. Love doesn't kill people. Not loving is what makes us die slowly." And she opened the door wide, not just the wooden door, but the door to her heart that had been closed for too long. Evelyn turned and ran inside, grabbing towels, thick blankets, a jug of warm water, and an old discolored first aid kit. Returning, she knelt in the snow, her hand gently pressed against the mother dog's forehead. It was ice cold. One hind leg was swollen and purple, the wound torn open, blood still seeping out, though partially frozen. "Little one," she murmured, "I don't know where you came from, but you've come to the right door." She wrapped the two puppies in a towel, bringing them to her chest. They didn't cry, didn't move, but they were still breathing, breaths as thin as silk, almost dissolving as soon as they touched the air. She used her own body to keep them warm, pressing gently to her chest to hear their heartbeats. then slowly lifted the mother dog. It didn't resist, only whimpered softly, like surrender or a final entrusting to compassion. She placed all three on the rug near the fireplace, wrapping them in the thickest blanket. The fireplace was fed more wood. Flames leapt up, light cast on the mother dog's face, where now there was no color of blood, only exhaustion and peace. Evelyn sat down on the floor, her hand gently stroking each wet tuft of fur. Once more she whispered, "My son once saved dozens of lives. Today I saved 3. We will not let anyone else go in the icy night. Not ever again." The mother dog slightly opened her eyes. A glance passed over her face, then closed again. No fear, no wariness, just letting go, as if finally finding a place to rest peacefully. And Evelyn, the woman who had closed her heart for 4 winters, now felt a flame slowly kindling in her chest. Not from the fireplace, but from the deepest part of a once broken heart, now beating again, each beat for 3 souls who had knocked on her door at just the right moment. Inside the cabin, the fireplace had been stoked with the last dry logs. The small flickering flames cast a soft orange glow, projecting the shadows of the mother and puppies onto the wooden wall, like a living painting embroidered with compassion and the fragile breaths of 3 small beings fighting for life. Evelyn knelt beside the rug, her knees sinking into the worn fur, but her hands trembling as if never having touched anything so fragile. Before her was a tattered, emaciated, wet, cold body, the smell of ice, dried blood, dirt, and urine mixed together, creating a pungent blend of desperation. That smell revived in Evelyn's mind a life she had once lived, in makeshift canvas tents on battlefields, where the scent of death mingled with gauze and gunpowder. Without speaking, without crying, she silently took a cloth and wiped each matted patch of fur, starting with the hind leg, where a large gash had congealed, turning into dark purple scabs. Each time her hand touched it, the mother dog shuddered slightly, but never resisted. Her resignation pierced Evelyn's heart. Her movements were both gentle and instinctive, as if those aged hands had never forgotten how to keep someone on this side of life. Her eyes fell on the puppy pressed against its mother's belly, which had just emitted a soft cry. So small it could easily be swallowed by the wind outside. The tiny mouth sucked at the air, the pink nose fluttered, and the soaked body trembled in waves. "You haven't nursed yet, have you, little one?" Evelyn whispered, tears falling without notice. She turned, took a jug of warm water in a small bowl, once used for Sky, Luke's first dog. As she poured water into the bowl, her hand paused midway. Sky. That name burst into her mind like an echo of youth, of days with the sound of running feet on wooden floors, of children's laughter, of home. Evelyn almost clearly saw Luke again, at just 12 years old, holding the newly acquired puppy in his arms. "Mom, I rescued her. She was left behind at the training camp. They said she wasn't smart enough, but I think she's different." She had meant to refuse, but Luke persisted, and a week later, it was she who let Sky sleep on the wool blanket beside the bed. That dog didn't need to be too smart, just that gaze, the way it followed Luke without fail, like a soul born to protect. She always remembered the image of Sky sitting silently by the window the day Luke left for the battlefield. It didn't howl, didn't bark, just stared intently at the snow-covered road until the military vehicle turned around the hill and disappeared. After Luke's death, Sky almost faded away. It wouldn't eat, wouldn't play, wouldn't bark. It just lay under the bed where Luke once slept, and one January night, it took its last breath, as light as a breeze, no longer wishing to linger in the human world. Evelyn had sworn never to speak that name again, a name too painful to remember. But now, in the small cabin, where the fireplace burned silently and the weak breathing of 2 beings gradually steadied, She felt the need to call it forth, like a part of the soul returning. She looked at the mother dog, looked at the way she gently licked her puppy's forehead, despite her own exhaustion. Looked at her eyes, and not resentful, not expectant, just a silent determination of one living for the only thing that still mattered. "You're a warrior," Evelyn whispered, "and I used to be someone like that too." She sat down, touched the dog's head, as gently as she used to stroke Luke's hair when he was delirious with fever. "From now on, you're Sky." The mother dog didn't move, but for a moment her tail twitched slightly, very slightly. But Evelyn saw it, and she understood, she heard, and she agreed. "And these little ones?" She smiled softly for the first time in many years, a genuine smile. "This mischievous one is Flint. And the little one who whimpers? That's Breeze. Isn't that sweet?" She took another thick blanket, wrapping all three together. By the fireplace, the flames still crackled. The room gradually warmed, but Evelyn's heart warmed most of all. She sat beside Sky, placing her hand on the dog's back, feeling each weakened breath transform into steady ones. The two puppies also began to emit small sobbing breaths, the smallest sound in the world, but enough for one to grasp hope. "Just like Luke when he was little," Evelyn whispered, eyes welling up. The boy used to cough when the weather turned cold. Evelyn would sit all night by his bed, hand on his chest to monitor his breathing. Every time she heard his breath slow, she would put her ear very close, ready to wake him at any moment. That feeling, thought to have receded more than 10 years ago, now returned intact as if it had never left. Under the blanket, under the firelight, was a family fighting death, and Evelyn, who thought she had lost every role in life, was being called back to exactly where she belonged, the role of a life preserver, of a mother. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Sky might not survive, Flint and Breeze might not make it. But in this moment, they were living together, fighting together against the cold, loneliness, and the darkness of loss. A strong gust of wind burst open the back window, but Evelyn didn't turn around. She sat there, hand on Sky's back, head bowed, eyes gently closed. And in the silence, she knew. For the first time in so many years, the cabin was no longer empty. For the first time in so many years, she was no longer living alone. The fireplace flames continued to crackle, but were no longer strong enough to drive away the cold, seeping into the cabin through every gap. Evelyn had added all the remaining dry wood to the fire, and the thick sweater she wore was damp with sweat as she hadn't sat still for a moment in the past hour. The mother dog, Sky, still lay motionless, but her breathing was uneven, her hind leg occasionally twitching slightly. Her body heated up quickly, not from the fire, but from fever. Evelyn recognized it immediately. After years as a battlefield nurse, she knew the signs of a severe infection as soon as she placed her hand on the lower abdomen. "Not good, little one," she whispered, then quickly cleared a space on the wooden floor beside the fireplace, laid down blankets, turned on brighter lights, prepared warm water and antiseptic. When she removed the cloth wrapped around Sky's leg to clean it more thoroughly, a long wound running from the abdomen to the hind thigh appeared. Coagulated blood had formed a thick scab, but the surrounding area was beginning to swell. As she wiped gently, fresh blood seeped out, along with thin yellowish pus. Evelyn held her breath. She washed her hands, put on thin gloves, and began using cotton gauze soaked in saline solution to clean the area bit by bit. Sky moaned softly but didn't struggle. Evelyn murmured, "Yes, good girl. Just bear with it a little. Mother knows it hurts." The phrase "mother knows" startled Evelyn. For years she hadn't called herself mother, hadn't allowed any creature to awaken that soft part of her, but now her hands were wiping blood and pus, and her heart was soft again as on her first day of motherhood. Nearly half an hour later, when the wound had been cleaned, Evelyn noticed something else. On Sky's neck, beneath the thick fur, was a circular mark, faint but distinct. She parted the fur. It wasn't an ordinary wound, but an old scar, as if a wire had been tightened around the neck for a long time. Evelyn paused. She bent down to examine it more closely, using a small flashlight to illuminate the skin near the neck. Under the skin, very close to the dog's collarbone, was a small swollen spot the size of a fingertip, as if something had been implanted. "A chip?" Evelyn exclaimed, feeling cold. Not a normal pet chip. She had seen many of those. This one wasn't in the right position and was placed very deep, with crude technique, not at all professional. Around it, Sky's skin showed signs of mild inflammation, but had healed, indicating this thing had been inside her for quite some time. Evelyn sat silently, her hand gripping the edge of the floor mat. "Who are you, Sky?" She looked down. "Who did these things to you?" That entire night, Evelyn didn't sleep a wink. Every 15 minutes, she changed the warm water, checked the wound, placed her hand on each little one's chest to check their breathing. Breeze, the smaller puppy, still breathed wheezily, but had no fever. Flint had begun to burrow against his mother's belly, mouth gently sucking, though Sky had no milk left. When the clock slowly struck 4 times, signaling 4 a.m., Evelyn flipped over the forest trail map hanging on the wooden wall. The nearest veterinary clinic was in Bitterroot Town, almost 11 miles of mountain road from the cabin. Under normal conditions, it would take over 40 minutes by car. But now it was winter morning, with deep snow, slippery roads, deserted forest. She looked back at Sky. "I can't wait any longer." Before dawn fully broke, Evelyn put on 2 more layers, donned a specialized cold storage coat, gloves, and a fur hat. She spread the thickest blanket to line the back of her old Ford Ranger pickup, then gently carried each life up, as if carrying fragile glass pieces. The road down the mountain was cold, snow-white, and bumpy. Each time the wheels slipped slightly, her heart jumped. But not once did she think of turning back. Bitterroot Veterinary Clinic, 7:25 a.m. "Mrs. Evelyn, heavens, how did you get here in this storm?" The voice of the doctor on duty, Ms. Monroe, rang out in astonishment as she pushed open the door. "I need you to look at these 3. Emergency!" Sky was placed on the examination table. Flint and Breeze lay in a fabric bag lined with cloth, right next to a small heater. Evelyn stood beside them, her hand still not releasing Sky's paw. Monroe was experienced. Just as she placed her hand on Sky's neck, she frowned. "There's a foreign object under the skin. I need to check." She took a scanner. A beep sounded. "There's a chip, but it's strange." A few minutes later, the chip was scanned for its code. Not an ordinary chip. No owner's name appeared, no information in the National Pet Database. It seems to have been tampered with. Someone deliberately concealed it, Monroe said softly, her eyes meeting Evelyn's. "And the scar around the neck. That's no accident." Evelyn looked at Sky, who had now been given pain medication and was dozing off. "Do you think she was kept in a training camp?" Monroe nodded slowly. "Highly likely. This type of chip has been found in illegal training camps, or unregistered facilities where dogs are used for purposes outside the law." Evelyn clenched her fist. Fragmented images flashed through her mind. Sky's eyes, the scar, the always cautious gaze, and the way she never turned her back when sleeping, as if she had lived in a world where turning your back meant death. "If she was abused, then that person is still out there," Evelyn said quietly. "And if they come looking for her..." Monroe looked up, her voice deeper. "Then you've brought her into the right hands." Sky recovered with remarkable speed. After a week of care with antibiotics, fluid therapy, warm food, and love, the wound on her hind leg had closed. The swelling disappeared, thin fur began to grow back, and most notably, Her eyes had changed. No more fear, no more suspicion. Only a deep, calm gaze remained, as if she had traversed an entire broken world and finally chosen this place to rest. Evelyn noticed something strange. Skye understood her words, not just simple commands, but entire declarative sentences. When she said, "Skye, come lie by the fireplace, near Flint and Breeze, quick now." Skye would get up, walk slowly to the rug, and lie down beside her two puppies. When she said, "I'm going to get water, you watch the little ones," she would blink once, then not leave her position until Evelyn returned. Even Monroe, the veterinarian, exclaimed during her follow-up visit, "Evelyn, this dog isn't an ordinary house dog. She's been specially trained. I've never seen an animal cooperate step by step like her. Are you sure she didn't belong to the military?" Evelyn remained silent, but deep inside she had begun asking that question many nights before, and the answer seemed to be growing clearer. That morning the weather was milder, thin sunlight filtering through the misty window panes. Evelyn was sweeping the cabin when Skye suddenly stood up, ears perked, eyes directed toward a corner of the room, where there was a wooden hatch leading to the old basement. Evelyn followed her gaze. "What do you want down there?" she asked, but Skye didn't answer with barking or frantic behavior. She just scratched the floor lightly, then turned to look at Evelyn, her eyes unwavering. That look, Evelyn had seen it before, a long time ago. It was the look Luke used whenever he wanted her to understand something important, something that couldn't be said with words. She walked over and bent down to open the wooden hatch, covered in dust from years past. The basement was low, narrow, gloomy, and smelled of old dampness. Evelyn hadn't been down there since the day Luke was killed in action. Skye went first, without hesitation. Its silhouette disappeared into the darkness below, while Evelyn paused for a moment, her heart pounding as if afraid to touch the ghost of the past. But then she grabbed a flashlight and followed. The yellow light swept across wooden crates, cloths covering old items, a dented iron suitcase, a few empty ammunition boxes, and then an army green chest, large, heavy, with rusty iron locks, embossed with the name L. Harper, 12th K9 Unit. Evelyn's heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. Skye was sitting next to it, silent, calm, waiting. Evelyn knelt down, her hands trembling as if she were touching her son's ashes. She opened the chest, a worn-out military uniform heavy with the scent of time. In the pocket was something she thought she had lost forever, a small silver necklace, engraved with a 5-pointed star, the special emblem Luke had made for Skye, his first training dog. Evelyn burst into tears, not just because of the uniform, not just because of the necklace, but because of everything, the memories suddenly crashing in like a massive wave. Luke back then, still a young soldier, tall, his eyes sparkling with ideals. On his first leave, Luke brought Skye, a purebred husky that the unit had assigned him to train from puppyhood. Evelyn remembered it vividly. "I named him Skye because his eyes are as clear as the sky and because you were the first to show me what the real blue sky looks like." The last time Evelyn saw Skye was when Luke brought him to the base before his mission in Kunduz. After the mine explosion, Luke died, and Skye disappeared. The army reported that he couldn't be found. He was probably injured and lost in the dark after the failed raid. Evelyn didn't ask any more questions. No one brought it up again. Everyone assumed Skye was dead, but now Skye was here, in front of her, with the very scar where the collar used to be, with the same look in his eyes as before, and with an unmistakable instinct. Evelyn didn't know how long she sat in the basement. When she came to, the flashlight was dim. Skye was still there, his head resting gently on the edge of Luke's uniform. "Oh my God, Skye ... she murmured, stroking his head. "You survived, and you found your way back?" Skye didn't bark, But he slowly moved closer, resting his head on her lap, closing his eyes, as if he had finally found a place called home. Evelyn broke down. She no longer had the strength to hold back the tears. Everything erupted, like a storm after years of pent-up emotions. That evening, after Skye and the puppies were sound asleep by the fireplace, Evelyn sat writing in Luke's old notebook, the one she had kept since the day he died. Today I saw Skye again. Not a stray dog, but Skye, your companion. He survived. I can't imagine it. You used to say Skye wasn't just a dog. You said he was the only one who understood you completely because he didn't need words. I understand now. I believe it now. You didn't come back, but Skye came back in your place, and I swear I will keep him, as I keep you for the rest of my life. Evelyn closed the notebook. She stood up and walked towards the rug where Skye was sleeping with his two puppies. She gently sat down on the cold wooden floor, quietly placing her hand on Skye's back. A breath, a little warmth, and a memory came to life, complete. That morning the snow had partially melted, revealing patches of damp earth and gnarled roots. Soft sunlight streamed through the pine trees covered in a thin mist, making the forest around the cabin brighter after many days buried in white. Evelyn was making tea when Skye suddenly jumped up. No sound, no bark, but his body tensed like a steel wire, his eyes fixed on the north window, which looked directly at the only trail leading to the cabin. Evelyn immediately felt something was wrong. She put down her teacup and quietly walked to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. A man was approaching the cabin. He was wearing a long black leather coat, a woolen hat, his face mostly covered by a scarf. His gait was firm, his shoulders broad, his steps heavy like someone familiar with the woods. On his back was an old camouflage backpack, and in his hand was a large wooden stick. Not a walking stick, but more like a weapon for self-defense. Skye growled softly in his throat, not out of fear, but a sound with a warning, threatening tone. Evelyn froze, cautiously walking to the door, still holding the wooden latch tightly. The man stopped about 5 steps away from her. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice deep, even, but with something dry and cold. "I'm just here to find lost property." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "What property?" He smiled faintly, his eyes glancing past her, towards the cabin. "The Husky, female, gray fur, injured left leg." "She's not property. She's a living creature, and she's being cared for." "Right," he nodded slowly. "Cared for on my behalf." Evelyn frowned, her hand tightened slightly. "Who are you?" "Roy Beckett," he replied. "I used to run an animal training center in Idaho. We partnered with the military, advanced training programs. That dog was part of a special training batch. She doesn't belong to you." Evelyn didn't answer immediately, but in her mind everything seemed to fit into place. The tampered chip, the scar around her neck, Luke's memory of a program that was canceled because it exposed brutal training methods. "Did you know Luke Harper?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharp as a knife. "Know him," Beckett replied without blinking. "A good-hearted young soldier, but weak. He cared about that dog too much. Ruined the whole program." She felt the blood in her body boil. "What did you do to her after Luke died?" Beckett shrugged, his lips pursed. "The dog ran away during the mission, presumed dead. Turns out she survived and disappeared. Someone saw her lurking in the woods near Wyoming, but no one could catch her. Impressive." "She didn't run away," Evelyn gritted her teeth. "She came back, by instinct, by memory." "She's a tool," Beckett said firmly. "An animal that's been programmed, and I'm here to get her back, before she causes trouble." At that moment, Skye appeared at the door. No bark, no growl, just standing, looking straight at Beckett, the fur standing up on his neck, ears lowered, lips curled, revealing his cold white teeth. "Oh!" Beckett smirked, taking half a step back. She remembers me. Evelyn took a step back, placing her hand on Sky's shoulder. She recognizes the person who abused her. Beckett snorted. I trained her, as the military required, but the problem was she was too attached to that young soldier. When he died, she became unstable, became trash. I'm here to clean up the trash, nothing more. This time, Sky growled, a deep, long sound that rumbled in his throat. No longer a defensive reaction, but rage. His legs dug into the wooden floor, his whole body stretched out in a ready-to-attack stance, but still keeping the right distance, as if waiting for a command. Beckett reached behind him, as if touching his belt. Evelyn could clearly see that he had something tucked on his person. A dagger? A gun? Stop! Evelyn shouted, her voice piercing. This is my land. One more step, and I'll call the police. I'm not afraid of the police, but you should be. Beckett hissed through his teeth. Sky took a step, growled louder. Breeze, who was sleeping in the cabin, suddenly whimpered. Beckett heard it and turned his head to look. Evelyn immediately stood between Sky and him. If you touch them, I won't spare you. Silence fell. The wind blew strongly through the pine trees, the leaves rustling. Then, Beckett smiled faintly. Fine, but I'll be back, and next time, I won't be alone. He turned and stepped back out of the cabin yard, his eyes still fixed on Sky. Before disappearing into the trees, he called back. But you don't understand. That dog isn't just a dog. It's a weapon that's been awakened. Evelyn stood frozen. Sky was still growling. But when the door closed, he slowly lowered his head, nudging her hand. Evelyn knelt down, wrapping her arms around him. It's okay, Sky. I'm here now. No one's taking you away again. That afternoon, the Montana sky was lead gray. The clouds drifted heavily as if holding back something ominous. Evelyn put on a thicker coat, filled the fireplace with wood, and gently stroked Sky's head before stepping out the door. I'll only be gone for a little while. You watch the puppies, okay? Remember to keep them warm. Sky looked at her, tilting his head slightly. Evelyn felt like he understood everything she said. She had to go to town, more than 10 miles from the cabin, to buy food, some antibiotics, and new blankets for Flint and Breeze. Since Roy Beckett appeared, she hadn't left the cabin unless it was absolutely necessary, but the supplies in the house were running low, and Sky and the two little ones needed more than just love. The forest road was slippery this time of year. Evelyn's car crawled slowly like a turtle over the frozen gravel sections. The wind blew strongly, tearing through every layer of clothing, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't. A mother couldn't be weak. At the same time, inside the cabin, the fireplace was still burning red. Flint and Breeze were sleeping soundly in the fleece blanket next to the wicker basket, making soft breathing sounds. Sky lay right at the living room doorway, his head resting on his front paws, his eyes half closed but his ears still perked. An unusual movement. The kitchen window opened slightly without making a sound. Sky's eyes snapped open, his body tensed instantly, his nose sniffing lightly in the air. A scent, the scent of leather, the scent of bleach, and a familiar scent. Roy. A dark figure slipped through the window. It was Roy Beckett. On his back he wore a backpack. In his hand was a length of rope and a small syringe. He moved like someone who had spent his whole life in the shadows, weaving through the hallways as if he were familiar with the cabin. He reached the living room door. The light from the fireplace reflected on his gaunt face. He quietly pulled out the syringe, muttering, "Sleep tight, you useless things. Then I'll take you away." But he didn't know. A pair of eyes was watching his every move from the darkness. Sky didn't pounce immediately. He lowered his body, moving like a shadow, waiting for him to take another step, right onto the edge of the rug, where he was only an arm's length away from the two puppies. And then, Roar! Sky jumped out like a gray arrow, slamming straight into Roy's chest, knocking him to the floor. The syringe flew out of his hand. Roy cursed, rolling to the side, trying to get up, but Sky didn't let go. He bit into his left shoulder so deeply that blood soaked through his coat. You maniac!" Roy shouted, punching Sky hard in the ribs. Sky recoiled, stepping back, but immediately lunged again. His eyes now held not only rage, but the instinct of a mother being threatened. His 2 puppies were behind him. He wouldn't back down. Roy pulled a small knife from his pocket. He lunged towards the puppy basket, but Sky was faster. He jumped up, biting the wrist holding the knife, then rolled over, pinning him to the floor. Roy screamed, punching Sky's legs repeatedly. A punch landed right on the old wound on his hind leg, causing Sky to howl in pain. Staggering, blood began to stain his fur red. Roy got up, staggering toward the door. Sky still chased after him, limping but not stopping. Roy escaped through the front door, slipped on the threshold, and disappeared into the night forest, leaving a trail of blood and a broken syringe lying exposed. Half an hour later, Evelyn returned. The car stopped in front of the door. As soon as Evelyn got out, she saw the door wide open, a trail of blood leading from the living room to the porch. Her heart pounded. She rushed into the cabin. "Sky! Flint! Breeze!" There was no answer, only a faint whimper from the corner of the house. Sky lay there, his whole body soaked in blood, his fur disheveled, one hind leg shaking rhythmically. But his eyes were still open, looking toward the basket, where the 2 puppies were still intact, safe. She burst into tears, rushing to hug him. "Oh my God, Sky! You saved them!" Sky groaned softly, unable to lift his head. Evelyn quickly bandaged the wound, cleaned up the blood, then sat down on the floor, cradling Sky's head in her arms. The whole cabin was silent now, except for the crackling of the fire in the fireplace and the labored breathing of a mother who had just won back her children's lives. She whispered, "You're not just a dog. You're a mother. You're my warrior. You're Luke's surviving soul." Evelyn knew, from this moment on, she would never let Sky fight alone again. The Montana sky darkened early that day. Thick black clouds silently gathered, like an army without declaring war. The cold, damp air clung to every window frame, the mist dissolving slowly like a smoldering memory in Evelyn Harper's chest. She stood by the window, still holding a cup of cold tea. Sky lay at the door, his eyes half closed, but his ears never resting. Flint and Breeze were playing with an old sock in the corner of the rug, their little feet tapping against each other like the smallest sound of joy. The cabin, after all, had returned to warmth, not because of the temperature, but because life was present in every small breath. But Evelyn knew this peace wouldn't last. After Roy Beckett's intrusion, she couldn't hide any longer. She couldn't just wait for him to disappear. "You used to teach me," she whispered, as if speaking to Luke, "that sometimes you can't avoid the darkness. You can only light a fire and walk through it." She went back to the bedroom. Under the bed was the old mahogany chest, where her late husband's Remington 870 shotgun was stored. She wiped off the dust, checked each bullet. Her hands were still steady, her eyes still sharp. Evelyn Harper had never been one to give in easily. Night fell. The wind blew strongly. The pine trees howled outside the porch as if heralding something to come. Evelyn locked the doors, checked the wooden latches, and put Sky and the 2 puppies near the fireplace. "Go to sleep. I'll watch." Sky didn't sleep. He sat up, his eyes fixed on the front door. Once again, his instincts preceded nature's warning. 11 p.m., a click sounded. The kitchen window opened slightly. Sky growled softly. Evelyn picked up the gun, released the safety, and pointed it towards the door. She stood in front of the fireplace, the fire behind her casting long shadows on the wooden walls. Roy Beckett appeared again, but this time he wasn't sneaking. He walked straight into the cabin through the front door, using a small piece of metal to unlock it, the kind of tool that only those who had been mercenaries were familiar with. He wore a thick coat, a glove on his left hand, and in his right hand he held a thick rope, the end of which had already been tied into a noose. "Enough, old woman," he said, his voice colder than the night. "I've come to take back what belongs to me." Evelyn didn't speak. She raised the gun straight up, the barrel pointing at his chest. "It never belonged to you." Roy chuckled dryly. "You don't know what you're holding. That dog isn't a pet. It's the property of a top-secret program. It was trained to kill on command. It's bitten 3 people to death. I know it well because I gave the order." Evelyn didn't flinch. "She's chosen to be a mother, not a killer." "Wrong," Roy growled, his eyes gleaming like a predator. "You're holding a ticking time bomb without knowing it. One day it'll go crazy. It'll turn around and bite your neck and those 2 little ones." At that moment, Skye stepped out of the shadows, standing between Evelyn and Roy. No need to signal, no need to call his name. He stood there, straight-backed, ears drooping, tail pressed close to his legs, teeth bared, growling like a wild wolf. Not fear, but a declaration of war. Roy took a step back. "You still remember me, you monster," Skye hissed. Roy pulled out a small device like a remote control, black with a red button. "Do you know what this is? A control circuit, a signal. Just press, and this dog will collapse or go crazy." Evelyn didn't blink. She still aimed the gun. "I know you're sick enough to do it, but I also know one thing. You can't take it back. If you die..." Both were silent. The wind howled outside. The fireplace crackled like someone's heartbeat about to explode. Roy was about to press the button. Bang! The gun fired. The bullet lodged in the doorframe next to Roy's head. A warning shot accurate to the millimeter. "Next time I won't fire a warning," Evelyn said coldly. Roy froze for a moment. Then he smiled. "I'll be back. Not to talk anymore." He turned and walked away, this time not running, not lurking, but retreating in bitterness. Evelyn locked the door tightly, standing still for a long time. Skye sat back down in front of the fireplace. His eyes looked at her. Evelyn put down the gun and knelt beside him. "You're not a monster. You're a miracle, and I'll fight to the end." The next morning, Evelyn drove to town. She brought the report, the chip found in Skye, pictures of the old wound, and Roy Beckett's name. She didn't go to the police chief. She went to the office of Agent Monroe, the female veterinarian who had served in the K-9 security force. And for the first time in many years, Evelyn decided to tell the whole story, without hiding anything. "I don't want to cover it up. I want justice. For Skye, for Luke, and for all the creatures that have been considered property." Agent Monroe looked at her, then at the file, nodded. "You've just stepped into a bigger battle than you imagined, Evelyn, but you're not alone." That night, as Evelyn sat writing her diary entries in the light of the dying fireplace, she had no idea that she was only a heartbeat away from justice, a decisive and irreversible decision. Each line trembled under the pen of the old fountain pen, smearing ink. "I know you can't come back, Luke, but Skye came back. He's alive. He carries not only your soul, but also a truth that this world has ignored for too long." Skye lay under the table, breathing evenly but his eyes still open, as if he never dared to sleep deeply, because in his world, peace was always temporary, a sweet trap that could turn into a storm in the blink of an eye. Evelyn knew that if she didn't act, there would be other creatures like Skye who would be sold, beaten, turned into tools of war, and then thrown away like strategic waste. And this time, she couldn't be silent. She couldn't continue to be someone who just stood on the sidelines to survive. This time, she would step out. She would fight, as Skye had done, as Luke had believed in her. The next day, when the sun began to shine through the Bitterroot Mountains, Evelyn put on her old wool coat, stuffed all the files, documents, photos of Sky's tracking chip, images of his wounds, and even Luke's letters into a heavy leather bag. Sky went with her, of course, because if Evelyn was a witness to the truth, then Sky was living proof that couldn't be denied. The pickup truck sped across the dirt road, kicking up white dust behind the wheels. Evelyn didn't roll down the car windows. She didn't want to look back at the pine trees that had sheltered her for so many years. She didn't want the feeling of doubt to creep into her heart, because if she turned her head, she was afraid she would be weak, and today she couldn't afford to be weak. They arrived at the headquarters of the Montana County Military Investigation Unit, which used to be a strategic logistics line when Luke was alive. A headquarters that was neither new nor flashy, but for Evelyn, it was the last door to bring Sky into the light. She presented everything. From the first time Sky appeared at the cabin door, the scar around his neck, the tampered chip, to the time Sky growled when he saw Roy Beckett, and especially the security camera footage in the cabin that Evelyn had installed after the break-in, recording the entire scene of Sky protecting Flint and Breeze from the man with the noose and syringe. No one spoke in the interrogation room. They just looked at Sky, who was sitting next to Evelyn at the time, silent, motionless, but his eyes shone with a kind of light that no wild animal had: consciousness, memory, and the desire to be understood. A veteran officer placed his hand on the chip that Dr. Monroe had removed from Sky, frowning. This code is an internal military code, but it's been tampered with. After a week of investigation, the results shocked both the police force and the military. Sky used to be a member of a high-level K-9 unit that the military coordinated training for, but after the failed mission in Kunduz, where Luke Harper died, Sky was listed as missing. And according to regulations, property that was out of control for more than 14 days would be recorded as unrecoverable. However, 6 months later, Sky's chip signal appeared at a private facility in Idaho, where Roy Beckett had registered a civilian animal tactical training center. Since then, Sky's traces were erased, the chip was replaced, and the file was burned, and he was sold to many parties, becoming a demonstration tool in unauthorized events, where creatures were forced to fight under neon lights and distorted applause. Roy Beckett was not alone. He was part of a network specializing in transforming K-9 dogs that were no longer usable, taking them from the list of fallen soldiers to the underground market, earning hundreds of thousands of dollars thanks to the killing skills they had been taught by the military. An arrest warrant was issued after 48 hours. Roy was arrested right at a wooden house by the lake, where he was preparing to train a new batch of dogs. When the police raided, they found 17 dogs locked in iron cages, many of them emaciated, their eyes bulging from being forced to use stimulants. Notebooks recording the codes of each dog, including the line SK5137, exception, bit the old instructor to death, uncontrollable, disappeared. "You used to teach me," she whispered as if speaking to Luke, "that sometimes you can't avoid the darkness. You can only light a fire and walk through it." She went back to the bedroom. Under the bed was the old mahogany chest where her late husband's Remington 870 shotgun was stored. She wiped off the dust, checked each bullet. Her hands were still steady, her eyes still sharp. Evelyn Harper had never been one to give in easily. Night fell. The wind blew strongly. The pine trees howled outside the porch, as if heralding something to come. Evelyn locked the doors, checked the wooden latches, and put Sky and the 2 puppies near the fireplace. "Go to sleep. I'll watch." Sky didn't sleep. He sat up, his eyes fixed on the front door. Once again, his instincts preceded nature's warning. 11 p.m. A click sounded. The kitchen window opened slightly. Sky growled softly. Evelyn picked up the gun, released the safety, and pointed it toward the door. She stood in front of the fireplace, the fire behind her casting long shadows on the wooden walls. Roy Beckett appeared again, but this time he wasn't sneaking. He walked straight into the cabin through the front door, using a small piece of metal to unlock it, the kind of tool that only those who had been mercenaries were familiar with. He wore a thick coat, a glove on his left hand, and in his right hand he held a thick rope, the end of which had already been tied into a noose. "Enough, old woman," he said, his voice colder than the night. "I've come to take back what belongs to me." Evelyn didn't speak. She raised the gun straight up, the barrel pointing at his chest. "It never belonged to you." Roy chuckled dryly. "You don't know what you're holding. That dog isn't a pet. It's the property of a top-secret program. It was trained to kill on command. It's bitten 3 people to death. I know it well because I gave the order." Evelyn didn't flinch. "She's chosen to be a mother, not a killer." "Wrong," Roy growled, his eyes gleaming like a predator. "You're holding a ticking time bomb without knowing it. One day it'll go crazy. It'll turn around and bite your neck and those 2 little ones." At that moment, Skye stepped out of the shadows, standing between Evelyn and Roy. No need to signal, no need to call his name. He stood there, straight-backed, ears drooping, tail pressed close to his legs, teeth bared, growling like a wild wolf. Not fear, but a declaration of war. Roy took a step back. "You still remember me, you monster?" Skye hissed. Roy pulled out a small device like a remote control, black with a red button. "Do you know what this is? A control circuit, a signal. Just press, and this dog will collapse, or go crazy." Evelyn didn't blink. She still aimed the gun. "I know you're sick enough to do it, but I also know one thing. You can't take it back. If you die..." Both were silent. The wind howled outside. The fireplace crackled like someone's heartbeat about to explode. Roy was about to press the button. Bang! The gun fired. The bullet lodged in the door frame next to Roy's head. A warning shot accurate to the millimeter. "Next time, I won't fire a warning," Evelyn said coldly. Roy froze for a moment. Then he smiled. "I'll be back, not to talk anymore." He turned and walked away, this time not running, not lurking, but retreating in bitterness. Evelyn locked the door tightly, standing still for a long time. Skye sat back down in front of the fireplace. His eyes looked at her. Evelyn put down the gun and knelt beside him. "You're not a monster, you're a miracle, and I'll fight to the end." The next morning, Evelyn drove to town. She brought the report, the chip found in Skye, pictures of the old wound, and Roy Beckett's name. She didn't go to the police chief. She went to the office of Agent Monroe, the female veterinarian who had served in the K-9 security force. And for the first time in many years, Evelyn decided to tell the whole story, without hiding anything. "I don't want to cover it up. I want justice. For Skye, for Luke, and for all the creatures that have been considered property." Agent Monroe looked at her, then at the file, nodded. "You've just stepped into a bigger battle than you imagined, Evelyn, but you're not alone." That night, as Evelyn sat writing her diary entries in the light of the dying fireplace, she had no idea that she was only a heartbeat away from justice, a decisive and irreversible decision. Each line trembled under the pen of the old fountain pen, smearing ink. "I know you can't come back, Luke, but Skye came back. He's alive. He carries not only your soul, but also a truth that this world has ignored for too long." Skye lay under the table, breathing evenly but his eyes still open, as if he never dared to sleep deeply, because in his world, peace was always temporary, a sweet trap that could turn into a storm in the blink of an eye. Evelyn knew that if she didn't act, there would be other creatures like Skye who would be sold, beaten, turned into tools of war, and then thrown away like strategic waste. And this time, she couldn't be silent. She couldn't continue to be someone who just stood on the sidelines to survive. This time she would step out. She would fight, as Skye had done, as Luke had believed in her. The next day, when the sun began to shine through the Bitterroot Mountains, Evelyn put on her old wool coat, stuffed all the files, documents, photos of Skye's tracking chip, images of his wounds, and even Luke's letters into a heavy leather bag. Skye went with her, of course, because if Evelyn was a witness to the truth, then Skye was living proof that couldn't be denied. The pickup truck sped across the dirt road, kicking up white dust behind the wheels. Evelyn didn't roll down the car windows. She didn't want to look back at the pine trees that had sheltered her for so many years. She didn't want the feeling of doubt to creep into her heart. Because if she turned her head, she was afraid she would be weak. And today, she couldn't afford to be weak. They arrived at the headquarters of the Montana County Military Investigation Unit, which used to be a strategic logistics line when Luke was alive. A headquarters that was neither new nor flashy, but for Evelyn, it was the last door to bring Skye into the light. She presented everything. From the first time Skye appeared at the cabin door, the scar around his neck, the tampered chip, to the time Skye growled when he saw Roy Beckett, and especially the security camera footage in the cabin that Evelyn had installed after the break-in, recording the entire scene of Skye protecting Flint and Breeze from the man with the noose and syringe. No one spoke in the interrogation room. They just looked at Skye, who was sitting next to Evelyn at the time, silent, motionless, but his eyes shone with a kind of light that no wild animal had. Consciousness, memory, and the desire to be understood. A veteran officer placed his hand on the chip that Dr. Monroe had removed from Skye, frowning. This code is an internal military code, but it's been tampered with. After a week of investigation, the results shocked both the police force and the military. Skye used to be a member of a high-level K-9 unit that the military coordinated training for. But after the failed mission in Kunduz, where Luke Harper died, Skye was listed as missing. And according to regulations, property that was out of control for more than 14 days would be recorded as unrecoverable. However, 6 months later, Skye's chip signal appeared at a private facility in Idaho, where Roy Beckett had registered a civilian animal tactical training center. Since then, Skye's traces were erased, the chip was replaced, and the file was burned, and he was sold to many parties, becoming a demonstration tool in unauthorized events, where creatures were forced to fight under neon lights and distorted applause. Roy Beckett was not alone. He was part of a network specializing in transforming canine dogs that were no longer usable, taking them from the list of fallen soldiers to the underground market, earning hundreds of thousands of dollars thanks to the killing skills they had been taught by the military. An arrest warrant was issued after 48 hours. Roy was arrested right at a wooden house by the lake, where he was preparing to train a new batch of dogs. When the police raided, they found 17 dogs locked in iron cages, many of them emaciated, their eyes bulging from being forced to use stimulants. Notebooks recording the codes of each dog, including the line SK5137, exception, bit the old instructor to death, uncontrollable, disappeared. An old video of Skye being forced to stand on an iron table, surrounded by the sound of whips and cold commands. Bite, hold, don't let go. Roy was silent. When he was handcuffed, he only said one sentence to the officer. We created them to serve the war. Now you're judging me? You're just disgusted because I'm doing the dirty work for you. But Evelyn didn't care about those sick excuses. She just stood outside the headquarters, Skye lying close to her feet, his head resting on her thick pants. When a female officer came out to announce, Roy Beckett has been officially charged with animal abuse of professional dogs, illegal trafficking of military property, and high-level threats of violence. Evelyn didn't shout with joy. She just bent down and stroked Skye's head. It's over, my dear. The darkness is no longer chasing us. On the hill behind the old barracks, where there was a memorial to the K-9 unit that had died in the mission, Evelyn stood in the strong wind, holding a photo of Luke and the silver necklace engraved with a five-pointed star, the one that Sky had worn when he returned. Sky stood beside her, not leaving. Evelyn gently tied the necklace to a small pine branch in front of the tombstone. "Luke, I kept my promise. I didn't let any of your animals be buried in silence. Sky isn't a weapon. He's a warrior. He's your friend. He's part of our family." The wind swept through. The silver necklace swayed slightly, reflecting a streak of light, like the look in Sky's eyes the first day he knocked on the cabin door in the storm. And for the first time in so many years, Evelyn smiled, not because everything was good, but because she knew everything was finally right. March came late in Montana. Snow still covered every hillside, but not as fiercely as the storm days. The wind still howled through the pine trees, but no longer carrying the sound of desperate cries. Everything became lighter, not because the weather changed, but because something else in people's hearts had calmed down. Sky lay in front of the cabin porch, his head held high, his eyes squinting as he watched Flint and Breeze chase each other through the soft snowfield. The two puppies were now big enough to chase each other over the rolling hills, their feet digging into the snow like children exploring the world for the first time. Evelyn sat by the window, holding a pen, her eyes never leaving the scene in front of her. The sunlight shone through the clean glass, casting the shadows of the three dogs onto the wooden floor, a painting more vivid than any she had ever hung in the house. On the wooden table, the letter she was writing was unfinished. It was a letter sent to Luke's old K9 unit, a letter that didn't carry resentment, didn't question, just told the story of a creature that had been forgotten but still decided to come back. She wrote, "To those who served with my son, Sky is home. Not the base, not the camp, but home, where he chose to return, not by order, but by instinct and love. He saved my life, not only with his fangs or fighting spirit, but with the presence of a soul that knows how to love." Sky is Luke's last surviving warrior, but now he's no longer a weapon. He's a mother. He's a friend. He's part of the family. She folded the letter, stamped it, and placed it on the table next to the fireplace. Sky had fully recovered. The wound on his leg was only a thin scar, but she still let him wear the silver necklace around his neck. As a reminder, the past doesn't need to be erased, it just needs to be understood correctly. Flint was bold, mischievous, no different from Luke when he was a child. As soon as he saw the door open, he was ready to fly out, even if it was just to chase a gust of wind. Breeze was quieter, often snuggling up to his mother and often lying for hours next to Evelyn whenever she read. In the evening, the whole family gathered around the fireplace. Evelyn sat in her old armchair, knitting a scarf for Flint, her eyes glancing at Sky, who was lying right under her feet, his head resting lightly on her calf, breathing evenly. The fireplace burned, crackling, the fire reflecting on the walls like dancing streaks of memory. But this time it was no longer the memory of loss, loneliness, or heartbreak, but the memory that was being rewritten with breaths, with glances, with the warmth of a new home. Evelyn had never thought she would live again, in the fullest sense. She used to think she was just waiting for time to pass, day by day, like counting down to a predetermined end. But Sky had come, bringing not only Luke's breath, but also a reason to continue, not to forget, but to live with the memories in a complete way, without fear. "You used to teach me that love always comes with loss, but I didn't understand that until I lost you and then met Sky again. Now I understand. It's not about avoiding loss, it's about finding something worth trading for." Sky, Flint, Breeze, that's it. On the last night of winter, when the wind withdrew from the hills, Evelyn opened the window, letting Sky lie right on the threshold. The starry sky sparkled. Snow fell lightly on the trees. Sky moved slightly, tilted his head, and looked up at the sky. Evelyn didn't need to guess. She knew he was looking toward the place where Luke had left. Maybe he didn't fully understand what death was, but he understood the pain of loss, and he understood that he was no longer alone. Evelyn bent down, gently stroking Sky's head, then sat down on the rug, leaning against the back of the chair. Sky put his head on her leg, a long breath, but no longer tired, just peace of mind. The fire in the fireplace crackled, reflecting on Evelyn's cheeks. Her eyes closed slightly, her lips smiling. No more darkness, no more loneliness. Just a family, and the fire in the heart, enough to warm all the lost years. Sky was not just a dog, but living proof of loyalty, resilience, and unconditional protective instincts. Evelyn had lost the whole world in the war, but Sky, Flint, and Breeze had brought that world back in a more gentle and complete way than ever before. If you were her, would you be willing to open your heart to a creature that had been hurt like Sky? Please share your thoughts in the comments. We always want to hear your story. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share it with those who also love animals, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories, where love and hope always have a way to return.